Welcome back to the third segment of the BW Conference on India Central Asia Relations, Connectivity, Trade and Security, the Unfolding New Horizons. Now, India shares a common interest and agenda with Central Asian countries, which is obvious one in ensuring stability of the region, which has historically been the cause of disruption and instability in India. This is even more so after the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. So while its stakes are high in the region, India is jockeying to explore what role it can play, particularly in the context of the competition for influence in the region. Indian efforts are visible. The inception of the India-Central Asia dialogue at the foreign ministers level, the third meeting of which was held in New Delhi from the 18th of December to the 20th, 2021, has provided an impetus to India's Central Asia relations. The participation of the secretaries of National Security Councils of Central Asian countries in the regional security dialogue on Afghanistan held in Delhi on the 10th of November 2021 outlined a common regional approach on Afghanistan. All parties concerned shared their anxieties on the Taliban takeover. Now, before I throw this open to the eminent panel, I just want to leave them with this thought that when faced with its first major crisis recently, the biggest and the most resourceful Central Asian country, Kazakhstan, turned to Russia as a security guarantor. There was no recourse to the SCO for military cover. On whether this is a significant pointer and on whether India still needs Russian blessings in its outreach to Central Asia, I will hand this over to the panel. I will once again introduce the panel, the very eminent and distinguished panel, which I feel honored to host. We have Professor Harsh Pant, Director Study. We have Professor Pant from King's College, London. We have Major General B.K. Sharma, Director, the United Services Institution of India. Mr. Iqbal Malhotra, Chairman, Producer, and Author, and he's from AIM Television. Lieutenant General R.K. Sawhney, the former Deputy Chief of Army Staff and the Center Head for the National Security and Strategic Studies and Internal Security Studies at the Vivekanand International Foundation. Let's begin with General Sawhney, requesting him to give his opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, since the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991, Central Asia has emerged as a critical geopolitical space. At the crossroads of West and South Asia, its strategic location has often resulted in spillover of challenges beyond the region's immediate periphery. Central Asian republics, that is Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, share around 2,500 kilometers long porous border with Afghanistan, and hence the region remains particularly vulnerable to the unfolding situation in Kabul. The core security issues concerning terrorism, extremism, and smuggling of drugs and weapons from Afghanistan affect both Central Asia as well as India. This common threat thus demands, in my view, a coordinated focus. India's interests in Central Asia are manifold and have a direct or indirect impact on our strategic well-being. New Delhi aspires to play a constructive role in Eurasian political, economic, and security settings. However, due to lack of requisite will and absence of direct land connectivity, India's effort in this regard did not gather the desired momentum. The present government, however, has initiated processes and dialogues to enhance different facets of engagement with Central Asia, and notable events in this connection, as was mentioned by the moderator, quite a few of them, I enumerate some of them, was the visit of in 2015 of PM Modi to all the 5 Central Asian countries. It was the first ever visit of any Indian Prime Minister to whole of the region in one go. The new landmark in our quest for closer relationship with Central Asia was in 2017, when India became a permanent member of the SCO. India Central Asia Dialogue. The first ever India Central Asia Dialogue at foreign ministers level was held in Samarkand, Uzbekistan in January 2019. Afghanistan also participated in this event. Several initiatives were thought of during this interaction to enhance our cooperation with this region. And India's Central Asia Development Group was announced to work on proposals for developing an India Central Asia Business Council to enhance trade and commerce between India and this region. On October 28, the second meeting of the India Central Asia Dialogue was held in virtual format under the chairmanship of India's External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. Jaishankar. The emphasis was on countering COVID-19, India's development assistance to the Central Asian republics, and promoting trade and business as well as cultural connections, tourism, and people-to-people contact. The third India Central Asia Dialogue took place in Delhi on December 19, 2021. The Indian Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, met with the foreign ministers of the Central Asian republics jointly as well as bilaterally, and emphasized the need to focus on the 4 C's, that is commerce, capacity building, connectivity, and connect. These aspects are crucial to strengthen India's footprint in Central Asia. Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India's full SCO membership is considered a forward move in our engagement with the Central Asia. This has helped enhance India's strategic presence in the region. While being a part of the SCO, India has put forward many concrete proposals for the regional cooperation in the different areas. Indian Daily Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan. India convened the Daily Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan in New Delhi on 10th November 2021. NSA's secretaries of the Security Council of Central Asian Republics, Russia, and Iran participated in the dialogue, which was a significant achievement of India's active diplomacy in Afghanistan, having a direct bearing on security of Central Asia. In the end, I would like to emphasize that connectivity is the most important facet of our relationship with Central Asia, and Iran plays a crucial role in it as a connectivity provider. Without Iran, India-Central Asia relationship cannot achieve its full potential. The Chabahar port and the INSTC remain central in this regard. Central Asia trade is much below its potential, and the factor behind it is the lack of direct connectivity. Some more innovative steps to further improve this aspect required to be thought out by us. Thank you.
Professor Pant, please, over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Thapar, and thank you for having me as part of this conversation. Thanks to General Sawhney for laying out, the broad contours of, I think, what the challenges are, and also India's approach over the years to the region. I would shift the focus slightly and more sort of conceptually draw out some of the themes that perhaps are important when we are looking at Central Asia as a geographical unit, which I think increasingly and importantly and more significantly in the context of Indian foreign policy, we have started doing that, which is, I think, a very, very positive trend to look at the region as a whole and to draw out policy responses that respond to the regional challenges as a whole, because the region exists as a unit in more ways than one, despite their internal differences. Now, I think when you're looking at the security challenges or the larger strategic challenges that the region faces, one can start from the larger sort of global landscape. And some of the pressures that I think are being felt across the world are also being felt in Central Asia. That is the structural challenge, that here is a region that perhaps is at the heart of what we call Eurasia. And there is so much talk of the Indo-Pacific these days that we often forget that Eurasian landmass remains very, very vital to great power politics. And in that context, what is happening today, what is happening in Kazakhstan becomes, Mr. Thapar mentioned Kazakhstan in his remarks, is very significant, because there is a jostling for influence among major powers. We often talk of Central Asia as this, where the great game is played repeatedly, and that great game never seemingly ends, because one phase ends and the other begins. So in a sense, the structural reality of international structure, international relations, is imposing on Central Asia like it is imposing on other regions. But perhaps more potently, because Russia has no desire to weaken its influence in that region. It is Russia's backyard. So clearly, the push and pull of America, and of course now increasingly China, and when we talk of a common security challenge, I think China is equally a challenge there, because it impinges on this at the structural level in what China has been able to do in the region, the way it has been able to emerge as a key economic provider in the region. It has transplanted almost Russian influence, although Kazakhstan episode would tell you that Russia retains its hard power influence there like no other country. But clearly, China's imprint, China's impact in the region is very significant. And that tells you and that's part of the larger story of what is happening at the level of great power politics, where structural changes are imposing themselves on different geographies. Eurasia is no exception, Central Asia is no exception. And there, I think increasingly also what the West can do, let's go back to early 1990s and think of the origins of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was seen as a move by Russia and China to push back against Western encroachment in Central Asia. So clearly, I think that those those pulls and those pressures have become increasingly more potent today than they were ever, because the great power politics is back with a bang, and Central Asia is going to be one of the most important theaters given its importance for Russia, where it is being played out, and we see it these days almost. In real time. The link to this question is the question of institutional pressures in the region. That look, we often talk of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but we saw, for example, again, the point that was mentioned by the moderator, by Mr. Thapar, that it was ultimately Russia that intervened in Kazakhstan in the form of CSTO, but it were Russian forces. So institutionalization in the region remains a problem. Institutions have not evolved despite some hope that at some point effective institutional frameworks would evolve in the region that will mediate the Central Asian challenges, but that has not happened. Now, that means that institutionally the region remains very, very vulnerable, that there is no capacity, institutional capacity in the region to do some heavy lifting when the situation demands. So it is again a region which is where we see institutional withering away. And the related aspect to this is the weak state capacity in almost every country in the region. The stance that are mentioned that were mentioned by Mr. Sawhney, the state capacity is extremely weak. The state is not in a position to deliver on a number of fronts. And even in the case, for example, in Kazakhstan, where we thought was one of the most stable state machineries, one of the most potent state machineries, we see the consequences of the system that had been in place for a while, the succession wars, the elite breakdown in consensus on what the political future should be. So there is clearly a challenge there in terms of weak state capacity, meaning it impinging on every other issue, both what the state capacity can do within these countries, what state capacity can do bilaterally with each other, what that weak state capacity can do in terms of a global framework where the global delivery of issues becomes a potent problem. So I think if you are looking at it in that context, there are three sets of issues: structural, institutional, and state capacity, which are a security issue in more ways than one. And then if you take one level down from global to the regional aspects, there you once again see that Central Asia as a region, the regionalization of Central Asia is extremely weak. Much, I think, in the way that we often talk of South Asia, for example, as a weak unit because we have not been able to integrate very well as a unit. But Central Asia is of course a class apart, where we have not seen regionalization happening, despite the commonalities of challenges that the 5 states face, and despite their common historical experiences in more ways than one. So that means that regional responses are not available to the challenges that are there. And those challenges have been enumerated repeatedly. And they are not hidden from one's eyes, whether it is the question of extremism, whether it is a question of terrorism, radicalization. All those questions demand a regional response, but there is no region to talk of. And so you end up in a vicious cycle of this weak state capacity, lack of regional architecture, not being able to tackle these common security challenges from extremism, radicalization, terrorism, all the way to drug trafficking and narco trafficking that remain at the heart of a lot of problems that emanate from Central Asia all the way to South Asia and beyond. So I think one can look at the regional question much more specifically, that regionally the lack of capabilities that we see in the region demand a certain response. And that means also that the reliance on external factors remain very, very huge. So reliance on external factors, reliance on external powers, reliance on external stakeholders. And therefore, when something like Kazakhstan happens, the first port of call is Russia, because Russia is the dominant player. It is Russia's periphery. And it is the challenge that Russia, that the countries in and of themselves are not in a position to deliver. And the final point I would make is that connectivity is an issue. Connectivity remains a very, very potent problem, both in terms of what India faces with regard to Central Asia and what Central Asia faces with regard to the world. I think they need better connectivity to the rest of the world, which they don't have. And that means that their dependence on certain actors will continue to loom large in their foreign policy, which means that their foreign policy options would be restricted, which means that when other actors like India want to have an engagement, there will be constraints embedded within that relationship. So I think there has to be an appraisal of what the security challenges vis-a-vis the larger global structure and the larger regional environment, how they impinge on Central Asia's capacity to project itself on the world, and what it means when it comes to a relationship with India. How robust that relationship can potentially be would depend on a lot of factors that are, I think, inherently problematic within the region. So I would end.
Very much, Professor Pant. I now invite Major General B.K. Sharma, Director, the United Service Institution of India, to give his opening remarks. General Sharma.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And my perspective is based on my living in that area for about 3 years and almost having an opportunity to visit it every year. Now, we all know that this region is going through a new great game, which is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And a classic example of that is what happened in Kazakhstan very recently, which was deemed to be the most stable state in the region. For us, it's very, very important to take a very realistic assessment of this region and have a very advanced understanding of the geopolitical undercurrents which are taking place there. Based on that, there is a need for recalibration of our policy, and our interest in the region as it has been hitherto should not be episodic, but it should be more sustainable. Having said that, the first and foremost thing is that we have to understand this dynamic chessboard of Central Asia, the Mackenzie's heartland, What are its characteristics? And presently, the issues that we need to understand, what power games are being played by different elites there. And these are not only in Kazakhstan, but it runs across in all other countries. Then there is a very serious, what you call is the relative sense of deprivation. And that has caused a very serious socio-economic deprivation, which has led or which can possibly lead to radicalization. And even some of these jihadi elements actually making their foray there. The other aspects that we have to clearly understand this geopolitics of resources, the geopolitics of what you call the pipelines, how different players want to, drive these pipelines in different directions. Then the transit and trade corridors. For example, your BRI, there are three prongs which are going: the north-south connectivity, the connectivity to the north, the geopolitics of the Caspian Sea, how some countries of the West, they want to take energy resources across Caspian. It's very important. Then the regime games per se, this is highly complex issue. How different clans, how different tribes, what their loyalties are, what their relationship with these major players are, is important to us. And now is this cross-border terrorism. You see what is happening in Gorno-Badakhshan area, Northern Afghanistan. Its implications for Rasit Valley in Tajikistan, its implications for Fargana Valley, which is like a powder keg. This has to be understood, and this all has led to what you call is military posturing. And that military posturing was manifest what CSTO did, or what the Russian troops are deployed in, say, Tajikistan. And the number of air bases that have, including a unified air defense command there. And Chinese are trying to incrementally enter into this security space in terms of bilateral arrangements with different countries, particularly Tajikistan, where they're modernizing their police forces, improving their border infrastructure, conducting bilateral exercises with them. They are trying to incrementally gain their influence in the security space. Having said that, then there are other issues. If suppose we want to invest there and we want to be a player, we have to understand the ethnic strifes there, particularly between Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan, which have been aglow there since 1990 and has cost so much of life. Then are these border disputes which still remain very much alive there. Water sharing problems of Sir Darya, Amu Darya, and the politics of water, energy, migrations issue. The why I'm flagging these points, that for India to cross from one country to another is not an easy job that you think that you just cross the borders of Central Asia and then it is a kind of a cakewalk for you. So those aspects have to be understood, because you cannot paint the entire region with one brush. Every country has its own characteristics, and those characteristics will have to be factored in our overall security or in our strategic calculus. Then, of course, there are other problems of narco-terrorism, which have Professor Pant has alluded. NDC material, it's a real threat, because when I was there were these Taliban people who wanted to come, Al-Qaeda people, and get hold of some fissile materials there. There are orphaned materials there. There are problems of RLC. There are these chemical warfare facilities. There are nerve agents there which can easily be used for this kind of a security problem. Then this whole dependence of the whole region now in the form of digital Silk Route and the soft, cities that the Chinese are making have made this country highly vulnerable and dependent, digital dependence on China. And India again has got some space here to some kind of a counterweight of sort of cyber security, enhancing the cyber security of the. As far as a great power station is concerned, I would like to flag two issues here. One is this Russia-China new modus vivendi. It has a certain shelf life. It may be in the near to interim term there, but in the long term, there are those contradictions which we have to analyze. Second thing is, now Pak has almost entered in all the troikas. Even you see the number of agreements with Central Asian states have signed with Pakistan, even certain kind of attraction that Russians have developed to Pakistan that needs to be taken care of. Then this Pakistan, China, Taliban nexus in Afghanistan, extension of CPAC, and a whole lot of other things will have a gravitational pull on Central Asian republics at the peril of India. In regard to our challenges which are there, one is of course our sustainability in Afghanistan because of Taliban regime, and that has very serious implications on fructification of your Chabahar, Zirang, Dilaram axis, because if you look at the lie of that axis, it is actually going through the heartland of Taliban network. So I don't think it's going to succeed. The only option that is available to us is the north-south corridor to Turkmenistan. But again, there is an Iranian factor, and I don't know how to overcome that Iranian factor. But on the positive side, the whole security scenario is giving us certain opportunities, because in the long run, relations between Taliban, Pakistan on one side, Iran, Central Asia, and Russia are fundamentally flawed. They will not be able to actually stymie or able to checkmate this enthusiasm of Ghazwa Hind and that kind of an ideology beyond Afghan's borders. And sooner or later, they are going to run into rough weather. And that is where we have an opportunity to work diplomatically in this Russia, Iran, Central Asia kind of a formulation, and also increase our weight in organizations like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where we almost become a bystander, and also have a greater say and a role in CSTO and UN related things. Other area which I feel is that we should not, even though covertly, keep our options open, because Tajikistan is a very important country. We have the Northern Alliance experience. Again, this, what you call the national resistance movement or the national resistance front, which is taking shape, it may get mushroomed and we may have our options. And that spade work has to be done now. These are my initial remarks.
Thank you very much, sir. I hand this over to Mr. Iqbal Malhotra, Chairman, AIM Television, for your opening remarks, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this session. My interaction with Central Asia goes back to the years 2001 to 2004, when I drove through large parts of Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Western Tibet, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan. And, I had an occasion to interact with the elites in those countries and to see what the conditions were like. And unfortunately for us in India, we are separated from Central Asia by two of our most potent and prime enemies, Pakistan and China. So we are denied access to Central Asia except by air. And by air also, if the airspace is shut down, we cannot connect with Central Asia. Now, our only access route has been through Iran, but as you know that in December last year, the Iranians signed this multi-billion-dollar deal with the Chinese. And now there are 5,000 Chinese troops in Iran guarding the installations that the Chinese are going to fund. So you've got Chinese troops in Iran, you've got Chinese troops in Pakistan, and you've got Chinese training the police in Tajikistan. So I think that increasingly India is going to be isolated from Central Asia by the Chinese through the land at least. So that doesn't leave us with any opportunities for trade or for mutual defense cooperation, albeit the fact that we have a couple of bases in Tajikistan, and I've been to those outposts. Now, the interesting thing is that the reason why the Kazakhs look to Mr. Putin to bail them out when they had this political problem a few weeks ago was because of their distrust of the Chinese and the way the Chinese have been dealing with their Uyghur population in Xinjiang. Now, the Chinese have only entered Central Asia, so to speak, in 1949, when Stalin invited the People's Liberation Army to bring in 10,000 troops because he needed to secure the uranium in Xinjiang and Aksai Chin for his weaponization program of his nuclear bombs. And he also didn't want to deal with the Muslim insurrection in Xinjiang, which is led by a man called Osman Betor, who was funded by the CIA. So the Chinese are a relatively new power in Central Asia. And the Central Asian culture is very dual in its outlook. It's, Muslim by religion, but they're Slavic in terms of their culture, and they speak and they're comfortable in the Russian language. Now, the Chinese have a tremendous interest in accessing Turkmen oil, gas from the Daulatabad and the 2-3 other gas fields. I visited Daulatabad on the Iranian border. And the reason for Chinese interest in Afghanistan is that they want to extend the highway from Peshawar to Ashgabat in Turkmenistan via Kabul, and also a branch off into Iran. And allied with this will be railway lines and pipelines. So they'll be able to actually access the Turkmen gas, which now comes to China through a very convoluted route through Russia. The Russians are reliant on the Chinese for their electronics. Their entire defense industry is based on Chinese electronics. And so they're not comfortable with the Chinese, but Chinese investment in Siberia and Chinese electronics underpin the entire Soviet defense industry. Oh, one of the other interesting realities of Central Asia is the role of Central Asia as a throughway for Afghan heroin. And I think that according to nations, the street value of Afghan heroin is $30 billion. Now that's $33 billion a year. And a large part of this, 90%, is actually controlled and funded by the ISI. Now, the margins in this are very great. And this cash throw-up has been funding the ISI last 30 years. So I had occasion to visit the borders, the Afghan border, the Tajik border, and I noticed that there were Russian troops then in 2001 when I crossed the border into Afghanistan. And all those Russian troops were because they were funded to look at the order of the Tajik border guard lieutenant. A salary of $20 a month was driving a BMW. So there are all these anomalies and contradictions. And as state institutions are relics from the Soviet Union, and they are not able to withstand the modernizations that have taken place in these economies and in their polities. They're all one-party states. They're all ruled by a strongman. And because of the way the Chinese have been treating their Uyghur population, they look naturally to Putin to bail them out because they're scared of the Chinese. Very interesting example is that the Chinese want to reclaim a large part of Tajikistan, which the Russians took in 1880 when they moved south from the Pamirs into Afghanistan and towards India, and they threatened British India at Hunza and at Chitral. So you have a wariness of the Chinese, and our participation in this Shanghai Cooperative Organization is incongruous with our participation in Quad. We are in the American camp. We are aligned with the Americans in the Quad. We really have no place in the SCO because what are we going to do there? Are we going to do military exercises with the Pakistanis and the Chinese? And seriously, are we going to gain any value from it? Because this whole mantra of non-alignment now needs to be fully discarded because we have 50,000 Chinese troops on the border in Eastern Ladakh, and we are spending a lot of money to face them. We are spending a lot of money to face the Chinese. We have our army in Kashmir facing the Pakistanis. And the Chinese want our water resources. They also want the water resources of the Oxus River and the Sir River in Central Asia because that semiconductor industry has now been transported and transplanted into southern Xinjiang. and their investment in these two big dams on the Indus River in POK, the Damer Basha Dam and the Punji Dam, is primarily because 40% of semiconductors require 40% of the manufacturing cost is the cost of electricity. And the electricity being generated is going to be pumped into Xinjiang. And they're seeing to do other hydroelectric projects along that entire grid on the Oxus River as well, so that the electricity can flow to Xinjiang. So in this context, what are India's options? Marginal, limited. If you take a reality check, we stand nowhere. And we can do what we want, but we cannot get connectivity for trade. We cannot get access to land routes or railway routes. The Soviet Union built fabulous rail network that actually runs through all these countries. And if we had access through Pakistan or China, we could, lay railway tracks and we could be doing a great deal of trade. But I think our options are very limited, and we have to look at it take a hard look as to how we can leverage ourselves by using the goodwill of our ancient historic links with Central Asia to actually form some kind of countervailing force or power, or a little bit of a, should we say, a small nugget of power against the Pakistanis and the Chinese.
Thank you for this brilliant and this very detailed overview of the region and the India of interest in politics. Mr. Malhotra gives that India's options are very limited. Would you believe that India's strategic outreach to Central Asia, is it an overreach?
No, see, our options are limited, but I don't think our outreach is not necessary. I think it's very important that we make an outreach to Central Asia, despite all the limitations, despite all the constraints that I think all the panelists have talked about, that we have to have a realistic assessment of what we can do there. But that doesn't mean that we should not engage with a region that is increasingly at the crossroads of great power politics, and whether we like it or not is part of our neighborhood. So the spillover effects of whatever happens there will happen on India. And I think Afghanistan has become, post American withdrawal of Afghanistan, has further given a new momentum to our engagement. And I think what is interesting in the Indian context is that Russia and India and Central Asia together again have a history of engaging in and around South Asia, in and around Afghanistan. And I think the comeback of the Taliban in Afghanistan has further ignited this, has given this relationship a new momentum. So we have seen, for example, Russians being once again being very cautious on Afghanistan after their initial enthusiasm about Taliban coming back to power. And we have seen Russian involvement with India on the question of Afghanistan, and of course the November meeting of India and Central Asia National Security Advisors on the issue of Afghanistan. So we have seen a trajectory evolving where I think there is a recognition in the region that they need to work with India. And I think Central Asia, because of this great power contestation, I think also needs diversity of partners. So with all our limitations, India presents, and I think all speakers have pointed out, India represents a country that has no territorial stakes there, that is largely benign power, that if given an opportunity can be incredibly effective in leveraging some of its own strengths in the region. With all, despite the challenges, India was able to accomplish so much in Afghanistan in the context of post 2001 environment. So I think there is certainly an appetite for Indian engagement for diversification of partners in Central Asia, and we are seeing that beginning to emerge in their context. How far that happens, whether the inherent limitations of Central Asia will derail the process, will make it difficult, will make life difficult for India's engagement, will constrain India's ability to project itself, I think that's a valid question to ask, and there is no getting away from a more realistic appraisal of what India can and cannot do in the region.
So
I like to comment.
Yes, sir, please come in.
You see, the point is, it's a very complicated area. And as was very correctly brought out, it's a great game. And I would say that in this area, Just about 8 months ago or 10 months ago, when we had a large role in Afghanistan, nobody would have talked the way we are talking today. And these are early days. The situations continue to change. I'd like to bring in another factor. You see, so far as Central Asia is concerned, they attained their independence in a accidentally, if you really ask me. So somehow or the other, they did not build subsequent to their getting independence, their institutions, because they were so heavily tied up to the apron strings of Russia that they almost took it for granted that their requirements of security are concerned, that Russia would be able to look after them. Now, at the moment, the Chinese have come with deep pockets. So they are looking after the economy, but there are inherent problems within the countries itself. They have the problems of aspirations of the people. They have got the problems of radicalism. They have got the problems of the insurgency, and they have got the problems of narcotics, etc. But which they are battling those problems out. But at the moment, the security itself, their capacities to be able to withstand the shocks like we saw in Kazakhstan is quite less. It's not developed as yet. So we see here in this a very curious sort of a situation where the Russians are still taken by them and they are proved to be the security provider as far as the internal problems are concerned. The Chinese, despite their deep pockets and their economic engagement, don't have the risk profile to be able to assist these countries with their troops. But that's a reality which we cannot disregard. So under these circumstances, they are struggling to find their own feet and inherent difficulty. The Americans have withdrawn. Americans have withdrawn and left a certain amount of a vacuum. So in this area, there are a lot of possibilities. I have myself been very extensively, I have knowledge about Afghanistan. I've been going there quite often. And when we were in Afghanistan, we did tremendous amount of work. Actually, if you ask me, $3 billion are no small change. And Central Asians know that the Indians have capacity and they have got also benign intentions. So India has a role. How they will be able to perform it, it is something which has to be thought of. But you can't completely write ourselves off and say that we cannot have any constructive role in this country, in this region. Actually, if you ask me, economy and security both have a very close connection. So in case we can develop a relationship with these countries via the various, routes, which are, of course, very difficult to develop, which we have to invest in, there are possibilities. So I think those possibilities should not be written off, in my view. And we should continue to watch. These are early days. Things are difficult, but we are part of certain organizations. We are part of certain dialogues. Instantly, we cannot. Of course, that's what has been brought out very correctly. The constraint is that of the connectivity. To be able to help out, to be able to have a, healthy trade, etc. It requires connectivity, which at the moment, with Afghanistan being in, the change in the governance, with our problems with Pakistan. So there are problems, but those problems, in my view, may not remain forever. There are possibilities which should not write off. So in my view, we should continue to strive to have a relationship, because in the end of the day, Central Asia has a connect as far as our own security considerations are concerned. So that is my view.
So you're saying don't give up and continue to strive for a...
Yeah, I said don't give up, because it's a great game, as somebody very correctly brought out. You never know when the things change, and you cannot continue to keep thinking of the old problems. The problems are always there, but the problems somehow tend to get away at times, and the path open. But if you don't strive, if you don't connect, if you don't, what do you call, make efforts, so that is where the people will forget. And we are not a small entity. After all, we have aspirations and we have got the possibilities and we have the wherewithal. So in my view, Central Asia should not be ignored by India, despite all the problems which have been brought about. And we should see the example. You see, Afghanistan, for example, if you seriously ask me, its northern portion could be clubbed with Central Asia. And in those difficult area, that difficult area, where there was so much of contestation, we played a very positive role. We almost invested $3 billion. Actually, due to certain circumstances, which I will not like to discuss, with the abrupt withdrawal of Americans, and of course, the internal politics of Afghanistan itself, and the certain forces not acting the way they should have acted, Taliban got something which they themselves were surprised with. So there can be surprises subsequently too. I think India is too important a country to sort of accept that they don't have any role in this area, but which we have got a connect not only from 200, 300, but thousands of years ago, we have got to connect with this area. We just can't give it up. It is our area of influence, in my view, and I'm making a bold statement. We have had our footprints, Indian footprints, civilizational footprints in this area, and we have a benign presence which is accepted by the Central Asians. So we should continue to strive to do whatever we possibly can in this area. This is my view.
So look at the long road ahead and don't lose sight of your interest. That's what General Sawhney is saying. So India has a benign presence, and in Central Asia, there's an appetite for Indian engagement. Mr. Malhotra, but when you look at when you do a reality check in the present circumstances, can the North-South corridor, can it compete with the BRI?
Let me just tell you something, Mr. Thapar, that the general was talking about integrating Afghanistan with Northern Afghanistan with Central Asia. I'm sure if he's actually traveled there, I have crossed the border from Tajikistan across the Oxus River into the Badakhshan province of Afghanistan. And let me tell you that even though the people are ethnically the same Tajiks, their language is different because they speak Dari over there, south of the border, and north of the border, they speak a different dialect. And they're also very Slavic. They're westernized. They wear Western clothes. They may visit a mosque, but they also eat pork. Now, once you cross the border, you're crossing into a time warp. Northern Afghanistan has got nothing in common with southern Tajikistan, absolutely nothing. There is no recognition culturally, except for ethnic ties, of any cultural similarity between those two countries. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, this North-South corridor is a big mix, because in Iran are going to be even more limited as the Chinese presence in Iran increases and India's commitment to the Quad increases. There is no longer non-alignment. Either India accepts Chinese hegemony and pays tribute to the Chinese and then gets an opportunity to enter into trade and discourse with Central Asia, or India follows its own path of building an alliance with the Japanese and the Americans and counters the Chinese. Because see, Central Asia is important, was important, but the fact is that the fellows who invaded India in the 16th century, they all came from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Who were the Mughals? They were Tajiks, right? So the fact of the matter is that, while we do have cultural ties and we can say that this is India's backwater or sphere of influence, the fact is that in today's political climate, that part of the world and the culture that it exported to India is the antithesis of today's politics. So you have an issue that what are you going to do to maintain your options? Because you have a military base in Dushanbe in Aini, and you have another military base down in the border with that I visited. You you actually need to maintain your diplomatic and cultural ties with them. And also you need to fund the political parties over there who are in power, because by giving out money, you actually build a connect with the elites over there. You can't just say that, this is this and we are hoping to get an inroad into Central Asia. You need to do something tangible. Tangibly, you can fund the political elites. You should have a budget of actually spending between $50 to $100 million per country every year to fund the political elites. And you have cultural ties with them. But trade seems an impossibility. You'll really find this, that in the next 2 years, as the Chinese presence in Iran increases, one fine day you're going to find that you're not going to be able to access Central Asia through the famed Chahabahar port, or you'll be blockaded by the Chinese. Your shipping will be vulnerable. So the fact of the matter, you may disagree with me, sir. That's your choice, but I mean, this is my view.
Choice, sir. You have got very definitive ideas. I'm not you are very well informed, I think. But I feel that things don't go the way you are thinking. Because you just can't write off India. No, sir, you can't. You can't write off India, I'm afraid. And India it's not gone into any camp. We have capacities to be multilaterally engaged with different people, including Iran, America. We can be the member of the Quad, but we can also be the member of the SCO. We are member of the BRICS. So we at multilateral levels. So I would not like to write off.
India is a member of
we're not writing off India. I'm saying
if
you do a SWOT analysis, or you take a reality check.
Sir, I want to tell you that there is a similarity, there is an ethnic connect between the Tajiks and the Tajiks of Afghanistan, between the Uzbeks and Uzbeks of Afghanistan. There is a connect. Of course, you're right, because the people in the what you call Central Asia have got a veneer of westernization because of the Russian influence. But there are still ethnic ties which are very much, working in a very curious fashion. I will not go into those details, but I would not accept that India is a country which doesn't have possibilities in this area. We are all talking about that there are the trade, of course, there are constraints because of the connectivity. But we talked about the north-south corridor. We talked about the relationship with Iran. And relationship with Iran again, relationship with Iran again. You cannot say that there'll be a break because the Chinese influence will come in. I don't know.
I have a very strong suggestion right now that we should fund the political elites in these 5 Central Asian countries to the extent of $50 to $100 million a year. That's a very big investment that we can make in maintaining our sphere of influence. And I also said that we need to maintain cultural contacts with them. But beyond that, at this point of time, I mean, if you think out of the box, what else can we do? There isn't very much else.
That's an interesting thought. And if I can take this to Professor Pant, in the past, our access to the region and the players, then with the blessings of Russia, the panelists have made a mention of the Indian role in Tajikistan in countering the earlier Taliban regime, the mentoring and the assistance to Ahmad Shah Massoud, the military facilities which were created for him. And in fact, legend has it that Ahmad Shah Massoud was declared dead at a military hospital across the border by the Indian military, by the Army Medical Corps. So my question to Professor Pant is that given the realities and the interplay of great power interests in the region, would India's access to the region, would India inevitably have to piggy ride Russia?
See, certain for India, I think Russia tie is changing, and India-Russia tie also historically nature. So I don't think it means that India will have to, piggy ride on Russia or use it as a as a conduit. I think there are possibilities of India doing several things, some things on its own. But I think certainly if India and Russia are working together, and we have seen that in the post August 2001 phase, if India and Russia are working together with a similar outlook towards it, then it helps in India leveraging its role in the region. There is no doubt about it, and I think that is something that is to India's advantage, that we have a solid relationship despite its ups and downs with Russia, and Russia remains therefore a very important interlocutor for India in the Eurasian land context. And that is the reason why you see India, despite having a very strong focus on the Indo-Pacific, not losing out or not disconnecting itself entirely from Russia, because there is a clear realization that when it comes to the continent and comes to the Eurasia, Russia is a very important partner for various reasons.
General Sharma, sir, if I may come across to you, what do you think can be the basis for cooperation with Central Asia, which needs to be pursued over a period of time? What is it which should be done, which will make India more relevant to the region?
See, firstly, we've not come up to the expectation of Central Asian Republic so far. They had a lot of expectations. They reached out to us, but it was our inertia and our incapacity to come up to those expectations. Now there is a strategic gap which has very clearly emerged. Chinese have a trade of 30 billion US dollars. Russians have more than 17 billion dollars. We have less than $2 billion. We have no connectivity. So the first and foremost thing is, how do we become competitive, or which are those areas where we can fill the gap? And first and foremost thing is, I think our air connectivity, it must get reinvigorated, though this COVID has impacted, but this is the one area that we can go. Then other areas where we can enter is, I think, this cyber domain. Our telecommunication sector is very important. Our electronic sector is very important. And they would like to have certain safeguards there very much, wherein India can chip in. The third area where we can chip in is later, Talibanized Afghanistan is going to fall out with most of the Central Asian republics and even with Russia. That is the time which we get an opportunity to really galvanize this framework, counter-terrorism framework with some of these countries. And probably there would be a new realignment of forces which will take place, for which we have to do our spade work now. Lastly, let me tell you that while the Chinese may be able to make a dent into the political elite or in the economic elite of that country, but their people-to-people contact with Central Asian republics still remain very poor. No wonder then they were a number of Kazakhstan. They also did not give their land on lease to them. There were demonstrations in Kyrgyzstan. There were demonstrations in Tajikistan. And I have been visiting Uzbekistan almost every year. People are very nervous there. And sooner or later, when Russians and Chinese, they fall apart, it could be in another decade or so. That is the time that Russia would be a preferred balancer in the region, in the overall balance of power, for which we have to develop our capacities and our leverages and improve our deliverance credibility.
Sawhney, Taliban is in power in Afghanistan. There have been huge Indian efforts, including substantial investment, as you talked about. What ought to be the approach at this point in time with the Taliban regime?
We should wait and watch, because in my view, these people have come to a country after 20 years. In 20 years, they have come absolutely accidentally, and they have come because Afghanistan was let down by America. It was let down by its own elite. In my view, Taliban is an entity which is going to be temporary. This country in the last 20 years has progressed. This country has modernized. They have developed aspirations. Educationally, they have improved. So even economically, they have improved. Taliban don't have the resources, don't have the skills, and I dare say don't have the popularity to be able to rule this country forever. They are going to, what do you call, very soon lose control if they have not lost as today. So in my view, they are a phenomenon. It is going to be definitely a change. There's going to be, that change will come from within. And I very much feel that the time when that time comes in, India would have its relevance once again. There would be upheaval within. And those, I will not go into the details as to how India can come in, but I definitely feel that whatever is happening in Afghanistan is temporary. So once again, there is a possibility of stabilization coming in, a certain amount of democratization coming in. So that is the time when India would have its opportunity. And we should watch. We should be helping out the Afghans, because we have got a connect, not with the regime, but with the people of Afghanistan. So humanitarian aid, etc., which is going in, which must continue to go. And we must continue to help the distress which is there. There is a tremendous amount of despair and hunger there in that country. They have hardly any crops have failed. They have got no revenues. There is no governance. So the entity which is ruling Afghanistan cannot be permanent. So there would be a change, and we should keep watching it. And we should help out. And this instability in Afghanistan is going to be a threat to the whole of Central Asia. So that is where India comes in. And we should watch the situation and not hasten up any sort of a action if we don't. We are very that way careful. And the world knows that they have never tried to do things in a country or a region which are not in consonance with the desires of the people at region. So we should continue our relationship. We should, despite all the problems, and there are problems, we should be able to have trade relationships. We should be able to have commercial relationship, use our, what do you call, technology to help them out, the digital knowledge or digital capacity we have got.
Yes.
So in my view, we have to continue to engage with the Central Asians, and we have very good relations with Russia. And we have, what do you call, through, that's another channel which we should do. And in my view, our relationship with Iran also, despite all the problems, despite all the impediments, we have maintained a relationship. So those relationships will come in handy. I will not go into the details as to what we can do because it's outside the scope of this discussion. But in my view, Central Asia is a region which we require to continue to engage despite the problems, despite the difficulties, despite the impediments. There is a requirement for us. And I feel that this is what we are doing today. And it's commendable that the government as well as the, what do you call, the private entities should continue to make efforts in that direction. That is my idea.
The other key piece in this great game, Iran. Professor Pant, what can be done by India to create more common ground with Iran?
See, Iran has always, we know that Iran has been a very interesting nation in our foreign policy matrix for a while, given the challenges. And I think Mr. Malhotra was pointing out the fact that there is a sort of India being getting close to the Americans and how that has impacted on certain aspects. And I think Iran has been one of those issues where Indians and the Americans have been at loggerheads with each other. And India has also tried to maintain a semblance of, independence when it comes to its own strategic autonomy on decisions regarding Iran, and India has held its ground. There are a number of issues, for example, S-400 from Russia or Iran in Chabahar, where there have been threats of sanctions from America, and India has held its ground, saying that these are too important for our national security and foreign policy considerations, and we will of what the sense in Washington might be about these things. And interestingly, what has also happened is that space has been given to India. So Chabahar, for example, became a major point of contestation, you would recall, under Trump administration. And there was a lot of diplomacy back and forth about Chabahar. And in the end, India was able to convince America that this is something that is important for India. And if Americans had some foresight, they would realize that this was also important, given that it would have reduced their dependence on Pakistan. But I think in India's case, India has tried to have this sort of a tripartite arrangement in the Middle East, where India has tried to maintain a reasonable degree of relations with Iran, with Israel, and with the Gulf Arab states. Now, I think a lot of the commentators would agree that are two legs of those arrangements: India-Israel relationship and India's relationship with Arab Gulf states, whether it is Saudi Arabia or UAE, have actually gone through the roof. We have had tremendous achievements in these relationships, tremendous results we have achieved in these relationships. India-Iran relationship, not because of lack of anything that India has done, but primarily I think because Iran remains at loggerheads with a large part of the West. So irrespective of India finishing, for example, the first phase of Chabahar and delivering it on time, the reality is that Chabahar port remains not very functional, because it is not well integrated into the global economic system. Unless there is traffic there, you really cannot expect Chabahar to become the preeminent port in the region, which I think what Iran desires and what India desires it to become, because of the connectivity that it would provide India towards Central Asia. So I think a lot of these issues, what India and Iran face today, are a large part of Iran's own domestic dysfunctionalities. I don't think India has, in the last decade or the last few years, not reached out to Iran or not made an effort in galvanizing a relationship with Iran. But I think Iran's domestic, troubles, Iran's, disengagement with the West has prevented Iran from achieving a lot of the potential that it could have had. And this inability to resolve the nuclear question continues to hang like an albatross, because, sanctions, then Iran's marginalization continues to be a reality. So I think India can only do so much in galvanizing a relationship with Iran. But I think India has time and again, look, this is a very important relationship, not simply in the context of India's West Asia policy, but also in the context of what it does in transforming India's connectivity with Central Asia. So unless Iran does something about it, I don't think there are large possibilities here for India.
On Chabahar, Professor, we had the chief of Indian Ports Global, who was with us in the earlier session, and she said that even in the aftermath of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, the cargo handling at Chabahar is at the higher level than ever before. It is that port is operating much below its potential. She says it can be scaled up 15 times the cargo traffic. But those are very interesting thoughts to hear from her. So this has been such an engaging discussion, and only because of lack of time, we have to let you go. Thank you very much, each one of you, for such a brilliant discussion. Thank you, General Sawhney. Thank you, General Sharma, Professor Pant, and Mr. Iqbal Malhotra, for your very engaging thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
you. On this platform soon again.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.